Okay, last lecture, part two. I just don't want them to get too long in case you want to review something and then have to slog through the whole thing again. Hopefully you'll know like where to fast forward. But generally, if we're going to do a new thing, try to make it a new cut for you. So, meanwhile, in the north, we've got a lot. Looking at the same time period, we're looking at the period in the north. Modern day Belgium, Holland, as in the Netherlands, and Germany mainly. England counts as the North as well during this time. Different culture and different aesthetic taste than Italy at the time. And the biggest difference I think you'll notice is that there is no strong classical revival. We're not going to be seeing classicism happening in the North to any sort of reasonable degree because it's not their history. Like the Greeks and Romans, you know, not not part of their heritage like it is for the Italians. Um, so the aesthetic is more towards detail and the use of light and color. Big keys for the northern style are one, the use of oil paint as a medium. It is developed in the north when Italy, during most of the 15th century, only had tempera paint and painted al fresco at that point. You remember from our previous lecture on the difference between oil and tempera paint. It makes a complete difference as to sort of the level of detail that you can achieve. Cool colors. Not necessarily cool color scheme, but the lighting looks cool. Think like a sunny beach scene usually is a warm sort of light source because the sun is that golden bronziness. Whereas if you think of like light filtering in through a window on a rainy, cloudy day or in the winter time, it tends to have kind of a cool quality to the light. That's what we're going to be seeing. We're going to see light filtering through windows on like wet, rainy, foggy, cloudy, snowy days because we're in Northern Europe and it was often wet and rainy and foggy and cloudy and snowy. So you're going to be seeing like a lot of sort of blue, cool light. Even if someone's, say, wearing like red dress, it's still red, which is a warm color, but the light quality will seem cool. It will seem sort of blue, like a foggy winter day. Um, Sharp lines and folds. I've been pointing out the fabric studies that we've been looking at in the South, but rather than having those sort of drapey, flowy silks and linens that we see in the South, we're going to have crisp, sort of ironed, folded, pressed, and starched wools and cottons and crisp, thick linens. So really the fabrics are going to be much more starched and heavier. And I mean, I think that also makes sense to the South is warmer and people wore sort of gauzier, lighter weight fabrics versus the North where it's cold, they're wearing heavier fabrics and you can literally see the difference in that through the way that the fabric is folded and shown to sort of drape and lay. So in the North, we've got a lot of attention to the fabric fold details and especially a lot of attention to those sort of sharp, starched, creased sort of folds. Um, Symbolism. Holy symbolism, Batman. We saw a bit of that in the Fra Angelico, where we're just trying to tell that story of that birth of the Annunciation. It's a special baby. So we've shown that with that like ray of sunlight and the dove of peace and the hands of God. And so we've kind of, and that's less symbolism and more just like very blatant storytelling. Whereas what we've got in the North is going to be like super secret hint symbolism going on. And finally, detail. A huge attention to detail. And this can only be achieved through oil paint as a medium. You can get those super fine details. So, and again, the only ism that we're not looking at in the North is classicism, because they don't really care about Greek and Roman heritage. They're doing their own thing up there. So, here we go with Stephen Lochner. Madonna in the Rose Garden. This kind of seems like a riff on a Madonna enthroned. You can see that it's Madonna and child, but this isn't an adoration scene. She's sort of just surrounded in a beautiful garden paradise situation by angels and saints, maybe. So it's an enthroned, I guess. So we're not really seeing like humanism in that sense that we saw in the South in this example. So iconic symmetry. I mean, this should kind of remind you of those Madonna enthrones that we looked at in the 13th and 14th centuries as well. You've got that flatness of the gold screen for the background, and a little bit stylized in the faces. So it's a little bit medieval style, certainly more medieval style in that lack of humanism and sort of dynamic action that we're going for in the South. But what is different? Because this does not look like a medieval piece either. Sharp folds. Look at the fabric. If the faces aren't more realistic, then certainly the fabric is. We've got realistic cloth studies there, the draping and the folds. Madonna's face is also more, I guess, realistic and less iconic than we've previously seen. But details. Let's look at those tiny floral details. The sort of trellis of roses behind her is very detailed. If you look at the ground where we've got this, I don't know, they almost look like succulents, don't they? The individual leaves of every single petal are painted and shadowed and shaded and highlighted. That is an incredible amount of detail. There's detail in the angel wings to an incredible degree, unlike medieval iconic paintings. Another big difference between North and South is that we've got individual sort of secular portraits. So this is a religious piece again. The church was certainly a funder of the arts, certainly a patron of that, but we've got wealthy merchants in the North, and they can afford to have their portraits drawn or painted. So Jan van Eyck is sort of our kingpin best portraiture of, he's our best portrait artist of the 15th century in the North. He was credited, as we talked about in that previous lecture, with inventing oil paints. He did not invent oil paints. They've been around since at least the 7th century in like Central Asia, Afghanistan, but like Buddhist religious art has been done in it for hundreds of years before here. But Jan van Eyck refined oil paints so that they could be used in this way that you're seeing demonstrated here. This is a great piece because you can see that that is the original frame. It looks like a carved inscription, but that's just like shaded and shadowed paint. On top, those are Greek words that basically say like I can, but it sounds like Van Eyck in Greek. So it's a little bit of a fna on his part. I'm being like, yeah, Van Eyck. Yes, I can. So kind of his like Bob the Builder pun situation going on here. The bottom also very conveniently has a signature and a date. So we're moving into actually signing and dating our pieces. You can see Johannes de Eyck made this in 1433 on the 21st of October. Boom. So we've got realism going on here, certainly. I mean, that guy looks like someone you could recognize on the street, right? You know what that man really looked like. You know what that turban on his head was really folded like. You know what that fur that he's wearing on that coat is probably sable or mink because you can see the individual hairs. It's very realistic. You've got the oil paints where you can achieve this level of realism. Color is rich and deep, and that is all from the medium he is using. I mean, mind you, he's a master of that medium, but he was able to achieve this with oil paints. Notice how he's wearing sort of a chocolate brown coat with a black background and this bright red turban, but it's still cool lighting. This is not a portrait that was sat for in sunlight. It's sort of this very blue tint to the light source filtering through a window on a cold day. So all of that is very northern. All right, the Robert Campin Marode altarpiece. This is a great one because we've got, we looked at it last lecture or a couple lectures ago. So let's look at the northern style a bit more. This is an Annunciation scene. You already beat me to that, I hope. What does that mean? An angel tells Mary she's pregnant. So Mary is a lovely middle-class Flemish girl reading her Bible, which could not have possibly existed yet if Jesus hadn't been born. But we're trying to tell a story that she's a good, innocent little Christian girl. Linear perspective. Way off. I mean, it's consistent in that it's wrong, unless that is a super uncomfortably narrow bench, a very long, skinny, weird, useless room. The table couldn't actually hold anything on it because it's tilted way too far. Everything would slide off of it. So we've got this linear vanishing point perspective, but it's distorted from reality. But that's not really the important bit. It's the figures and the details that the artist wants to concentrate on. So we have no interest in classicism or even really classical realism at this point. So our interest is in the realism of the figures and details, and especially symbolism details. So characteristic of Northern religious pieces, and they carry over from that medieval Catholic mysticism. So one big one that you may notice in a lot of pieces is a sort of bowl of water and a white towel next to it. Those are a symbol of Mary's virginity in the Northern style. You might see a white towel hanging up next to a bowl of water in a lot of pieces. That is just a shorthand symbol for virginity, purity. It's almost like a logo for the Virgin Mary during this era. Also, there's lilies in the pot on the table. Very common symbol, the white lilies for Mary's virginity in the Northern style. So they're purity. They stand for purity. Flowers all have very complicated meanings. So you can tell an entire very complicated story with a bouquet. So what the flowers are actually does mean something. It gets really insane with love language by the Victorian era. That's not what we're talking about here. But that whole idea of flowers having meanings definitely had already begun by this point. Candles. One lit usually means the sort of presence of God. And you can see that one is snuffed out there with fresh smoke on the table. That's because God has just arrived in another form. During the Annunciation, you would think that Mary's womb has the baby Jesus in it because we've announced that she's pregnant. But we've got that sort of doubling down on that part of the story by, if you look at the window on the far left there, there's a little tiny baby Jesus flying through the closed window, carrying a crucifix over his shoulder, sort of beelining directly at Mary. So God has arrived. The candle is just snuffed out because there he is in tiny baby Jesus form. Also see the sharp folds in the dress. both the dresses there are very starched. They're probably wool. Some people see the Star of David in Mary's sort of knee spot here in her red dress. I think that that might be a bridge too far, but it's one of the symbolisms that's pointed out for this piece. So steeped in it, very interesting piece, tells the elaborate story, has some odd contradictions in it, but it's got that huge level of detail right down to every single hair on both of their heads and the feathers, and also kind of maybe not necessarily ignoring a realistic three-dimensional perspective, but certainly not focusing on it in the same way that we're getting in the South. All right, The Goldsmith in His Shop by Petrus Christos. This is from mid-15th century. Remember that symbolism is mainly for religious art, where we're sort of trying to tell those religious stories. What you see here is just like a mundane, everyday scene of everyday life. That could kind of be considered another extreme definition of humanism. Rather than only having holy figures and religious art or portraits of wealthy people who paid you to paint their individual portrait, starting to have these, what they're called genre paintings, where it's just somebody sitting in their shop or somebody going about their daily business. This becomes a very popular kind of painting in the North. And I mean, this could have been considered a profane subject before the 15th century, because like, why would your average person going about their daily work business be something worth elevating to high art? But it becomes a style that is kind of the way that humanism is represented in the North. So these studies of everyday life, the ribbon, the stuff on the table are very detailed. They're very realistic. If you look at the vanishing point perspective of the room, it is pretty good. This is sort of one of those first Northern paintings to have single vanishing point perspective very clearly demonstrated. So we got detailed jewels and things all over that back shelf behind them. The brocade design on that woman's dress is incredibly detailly depicted. Sharp folds in everybody's sleeves, very starched wool and brocades going on here. Everything's very stiff. Italian style, both paintings and fashion followed the body curves, whereas in Northern style, it's very stiff and geometric. That would have also been sort of what real people walking around would have looked like as well. It would have not been like following the curves of the body, kind of gauzy hanging dresses. It would have been very starched, very stiff fabrics that kind of create an artificial shape that isn't the shape of the human body. All right, here is another, oh my God, know this one for the midterm, because it is just this perfect representation of, meanwhile, in the North, a level of pre-Renaissance transition mastery was coming into its own with portrait artists like Jan van Eyck and Roger van der Weyden. So, highly detailed, very realistic study of portrait. Cool lighting. You can see that that is definitely like blue glass window, cold, foggy, overcast day kind of lighting. There's red sash on there for contrast, but in general, very blue light reflecting on our skin, blue background to the piece. Sharp folds in the fabric, stiff fabric. You can see how the ironing, this scarf would have been folded in the drawer. You can see the ironed folds of it, how it would have been folded. So detail. Roger van der Weyden is a true master of that Northern style of detail. You can see absolutely every hair on her head. You can count every hairpin, scarf pin, every single detail in her belt buckle is there. Another key giveaway here is that translucent veil over her forehead and hair. Getting that sort of translucent transparency that you see there can only be achieved with oil paint. So it's important the medium and technique here. Don't forget that our art toolkit approaching the piece, you want to talk about genre, medium, technique. Medium matters in the 15th century because if somebody's got a hold of oil paints, it's a northern piece. That is a dead giveaway because the Italians did not have oil paint technology yet before 1490. So this is 30 years before that. This is the North. So that medium, like what it's made of, is really important for sort of date and space and place. Also, you may notice she's got a massive forehead. Style, like personal beauty standards during this time, were to pluck the hair on your head so that you had like a receding forehead going on, because that was beautiful. And oftentimes women didn't pluck as much as the paintings would depict because the paintings are sort of idealizing the beauty. So that would have been sort of like a Facetune filter of the 15th century, is to sort of pull your hairline back and pretend like you actually bothered tweezing those front hairs more than you probably really do. All right, so these transparent oil glazes over it with very little pigment adds this depth to the piece. Even her skin is very luminous in a way that you just couldn't get with tempera paints, which end up looking chalky. So 1470 was the Great Exchange, where the Italians got the oil paint technology sort of in mass, and the Northerners got the sort of secrets of the classical Greeks, with the idea of vanishing point perspective and atmospheric perspective and foreshortening, and the sort of key things that we were driving home were part of the Southern 15th century transition. They weren't really a focus of the Northern 15th century transition until the Great Exchange of artistic knowledge and technique. So those two key concepts of the North had oil paints and they could achieve this, which I believe is absolutely like 11:59 p.m. before the stroke of midnight of high Renaissance mastery with Roger van der Weyden here. He is using oil paints to their absolute greatest potential. He is exhibiting a mastery of realism. And though there isn't any sort of sense of depth here, you've absolutely got sort of that mastery of the human figure. Does she look like a classical Greek or Roman beauty? No, because that's not what they were after in the North. They had different aesthetics for what ideal meant. So this piece, you would definitely want to look at it and talk about what you're seeing, but then point to what you're seeing and how it can tell you that this is definitely a Northern piece. It was painted in oils. It's got that cool colors, light source. It's got that mastery of realism, but, no other sort of ism being represented here. It's a, upper middle class civilian portrait. It's not a religious piece. So that's also a big nod towards this clearly as a Northern piece, because individual wealthy citizen portraits weren't really a thing yet in the South. So I hope that this has helped you kind of wrap your mind around where everything that we've been learning this semester is headed. And kind of giving you a little bit of top tips on how to really nail those art critiques for the midterm, and giving meaning to what we do. The art critiques, you learned the terms and you're pointing out composition and color and things. What does it mean? They start to be the hints towards now this sort of timeline of knowledge that you have of, the medium and technique matter, for you to say, like, boom, 15th century, that's Northern. having like hierarchical perspective and very cookie cutter stamp stylized faces. You go like, well, that was pre-humanism when we didn't really care about the individual or their experience, so that had to have been Gothic, or at least early late Gothic transition into medieval ideas or Renaissance ideas. Once you start getting like facial expressions and movement and overlapping, go like, okay, they're starting to get into some humanism going on. We're getting into that like ideas of the early Renaissance transition. We're just not executing them perfectly yet, so we haven't hit the high Renaissance, but we're in this transition towards trying to demonstrate humanism, an interest in the individual experience. If you see classicism, you can go like, that's the South, right? The Italians were interested in classicism, whereas the Dutch, not so bothered by what the ancient Romans used to be up to. So what you're seeing and then connecting it, what you know about the eras and the places we're studying is what makes it all come together. So those are all just clues for you to like glue it into that timeline and that space line of the styles and the major players and artists and the major movements that sort of represent the fashions and the ideas and the philosophies of the time. So the art is imitating sort of social and philosophical ideas of the times and places. And by understanding how to express that with the terms from the art toolkit, you can get a bead on being able to name the century and the country that something came from without having ever seen it before. You can simply read the painting to get those clues. I hope that makes sense. Good luck this week, and I will see you next week for the midterm.